Denazification. Ever since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, this word has been repeated endlessly in Russian propaganda as the central goal of the special military operation. It sounds absurd. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy is a Jew, and Nazism is seemingly nowhere to be seen in Ukrainian government, politics, or society. But Putin's crusade against Nazism rests upon the continued existence of a tiny section of the Ukrainian military, known as the Azov Regiment. One glance at their history makes it obvious why they earned the label: a militia formed by radical fascists and white supremacists, operating under Nazi symbols, incredibly accused of abuses and outrages upon civilians and captives. But what is the truth behind Azov? How did it go from extremist militia to an official part of the Ukrainian military? And does it represent the rise of Nazism in Ukraine? Today, on A Day in History, we'll explore the history of the Azov regiments, its origins, foundation, military role, and transformation into the force currently fighting in Ukraine today. If that sounds interesting to you, then feel free to leave a like on this video and check out our other content for more insightful historical topics. To understand Azov, we must begin with Ukraine's wider far-right movement. Like any nation, Ukrainian nationalism can attract extremist elements. In the early 2000s, this was represented by groups such as the Social National Party of Ukraine, SNPU, and its splinter group Patriot of Ukraine, PU. Some of these groups espoused fascist and pro-Nazi views, invoked Nazi symbols, and made heroes out of Ukrainian Nazi collaborators. Andriy Beletsky, who was a prominent leader in the PU, allegedly declared that Ukraine's national mission should be to lead the white races of the world in a final crusade against Semite-led Untermenschen. Race nationalism was a strong element of this ultra-nationalist far-right, and their language often echoed that of the Nazis. In another quote attributed to Beletsky, "One can restore almost everything: the economy, order on the streets, demographics, a strong army and navy, nuclear weapons, but the only thing that cannot be restored is the purity of blood." This far-right movement was relatively small, with virtually no political representation, but it led to several instances of planned or actual violence. In 2011, Serhiy Bevs, Ihor Moseichuk, and Volodymyr Shpada of the far-right network Social National Assembly, SNA, which was itself a splinter of the PU, were jailed for a terror plot to destroy statues of Lenin in the so-called Vasilkiv terrorist plot. The attack on Lenin was telling. Anti-Soviet, if not anti-Russian feeling, is strong among the Ukrainian far-right. It was perfectly primed then to join the 2013 Euromaidan protests that erupted across Ukraine after President Viktor Yanukovych chose to shrug off ties with the West in favor of a closer relationship with Russia. The far-right comprised only a tiny part of the protests, but they grabbed headlines. On December 1, 2013, for example, members of the SNA and PU spearheaded a riotous attack on the Ukrainian presidential administration building that left 50 people in hospital. The Euromaidan protests led to the 2014 Revolution of Dignity that toppled Yanukovych's pro-Russian regime. Russia didn't take kindly to this, and in February launched an invasion of Crimea and funded a wave of pro-Russian separatist movements across eastern Ukraine, concentrated in the Donbass. The new government of Petro Poroshenko was still trying to pull itself together after ousting Yanukovych, and was incapable of properly responding to Russian aggression. Enter the volunteer militias known as Dobrobati, dozens of which emerged to oppose the Russian invasion. Kyiv welcomed them. After all, if the Russians could fund irregulars, so could they. The volunteer militias came from a range of backgrounds, but several were far-right groups who took their existing ideology and organization to the battlefield. Chief among these was the Black Corp, led by Andriy Beletsky. They nicknamed themselves the Black Little Men, a nod to the Green Little Men of the pro-Russian separatists. Founded in March 2014, they joined the fight against Russia to compensate for the, quote, inaction of the authorities and the absolute sabotage of local power structures. The Black Corp made their first appearance fighting separatists in Kharkiv. Their intervention was violent, leading to several street battles and deaths, but they quickly drove down the pro-Russian elements there. Their success earned them support from the Ukrainian government and some popularity among the public, although the extremist nature of their politics was not widely known. Owing to their early successes, the Ukrainian government offered to incorporate the group into the Ukrainian military, offering them funding and arms in exchange for obedience to orders. The group agreed, and on May 5th in Berdansk on the coast of the Sea of Azov, it was officially renamed to the Azov Regiment and absorbed into the Ukrainian military structure. Bieletsky was its official leader, but several right-wing figures were involved in its foundation, including the Vasilkiv terrorists Bevs, Mosichuk, and Shpada, who had been released months earlier by the new government. Azov's first objective was in Mariupol. The city was a prime target for Russia, and in April, pro-Russian separatists had seized the city council building. Azov was a key part of the First Battle of Mariupol. It was they who stormed the city council building using non-lethal chemical weapons to flush out the separatist militia and retake the building. For over a month, they participated in bitter street-to-street fighting alongside other volunteer militias and official Ukrainian forces before achieving victory in mid-June. Azov had proven itself a formidable and reliable force on the battlefield. Afterwards, it remained in Mariupol to act as local security, doubling as cops and separatist hunters rooting out the last pro-Russian forces hiding in the city. Meanwhile, its fame exploded, making them popular among the Ukrainian public and military leadership, while earning them a grim reputation among the Russians. By late summer, Azov accrued almost 500 members. It was upgraded to a full regiment in September, and in October, its now 800-strong force was officially integrated into the National Guard of Ukraine. However, Azov's reputation was not unblemished. UN investigations identified several potential war crimes by Azov members that remain unaddressed by Ukrainian authorities to this day. In August and September 2014, Azov soldiers took a mentally disabled man into custody, where they beat and abused him for days on end. The man had to be hospitalized for his injuries. For whatever reason, Azov claimed that he was a potential pro-Russian separatist. Such reprisals against alleged separatists were common. Through 2015 and 2016, dozens of homes belonging to alleged pro-Russians were looted or destroyed by Azov forces in the area around Mariupol. In January 2015, another Mariupol resident was illegally held by Azov on suspicion of being a Russian spy. Locked in a basement for over a week, he was hung painfully from metal poles, beaten, electrocuted, and waterboarded. Torture of prisoners was something of a pattern according to UN reports, which identified several instances of the practice and noted that evidence extracted through torture was used to condemn alleged pro-Russian Ukrainians. Azov captives were reportedly denied legal representation and even medical assistance during captivity. Azov's alleged crimes spoke to a sinister element of the group that Ukrainian authorities tried to downplay. However, there was no ignoring the fact that Azov had been created as an extremist group and carries the marks of that extremism to this day. The group's logo is an obvious red flag. Supposedly, it represents a crossed N and I standing for national idea, or the ideal of unified Ukraine. It is also a mirror image of the Nazi Wolfsangel symbol, used by several divisions of the SS and several post-war fascist groups. The use of the swastika has also been known among the group, although it is not too common. Azov members have defended it, saying that the swastika was a symbol of peace long before it was an icon of the Nazis. The swastika was indeed a peace symbol for thousands of years, and possibly had its origins in the ancient Indo-European or Aryan peoples. Descent from these ancient conquerors is a common trope of white supremacist and pagan ideologies. Another common Azov and white supremacist symbol, the black sun also alludes to this ideology, representing the solar deity that these Aryans were supposed to have worshipped. The presence of these ideas is unsurprising, given the founders' own extreme right-wing views. Beletsky himself insisted that these right-wing views were integral to the Azov Regiment, and most, if not all, Azov members subscribed to them at the start. In 2015, one member insisted that at least half of Azov still held pro-Nazi views. That same member admitted that he was a Nazi, although he did not support the Holocaust. Azov's extremist views were a goldmine for Russian propaganda. Russian media was quick to portray the defenders of Mariupol entirely as Nazis, and Ukraine as a state in the thrall of Nazi sympathizers. This had been the Russian line on Ukraine for the last decade. However, to say Azov was representative of Ukraine is absurd. There were over 30 volunteer militias formed in 2014, and Azov wasn't even the largest of them, and its extremist views and political nature were very unusual compared to the other volunteers, not to mention to the actual military. With such a checkered past and radical views, Azov's continued existence in the Ukrainian military seems unbelievable. However, since its formation in 2014, Azov has changed significantly. Firstly, following integration into the military, Azov members were not allowed to participate in politics or stand for elections. This led several key figures, including Beletsky and Moisychuk, to leave it and pursue a political career. Beletsky formed the National Corps in 2016 to advance far-right politics and managed to secure a seat in the Ukrainian parliament. Moisychuk joined the far-right Radical Party and also secured a seat in parliament, although both have since lost those seats. The National Corps has been described as part of a wider Azov movement of far-right politics in Ukraine, but its separation from the Azov Regiment has only grown. In 2018, for example, the National Corps formed a new militia group called the National Druzhina. The Druzhina's mandate was essentially that of the old Azov volunteers: step up with force where the authorities failed, but targeted at crime and internal issues rather than fighting Russians. It was strongly condemned by the Ukrainian government, who insisted that all other paramilitary entities were illegal. Since 2018, the National Corps and the Druzhina have been linked to plenty of far-right activity in Ukraine and beyond. The party's representatives have appeared at conferences and events operated by far-right figures elsewhere in Europe. The group was also linked to attacks on Romani camps in summer of 2018, where men burned and smashed the camps to force the inhabitants to leave. It has also expressed opposition to LGBTQs and other policies and movements considered to be left-wing. However, one would fail to find the Azov Regiment involved in any of this. Today, the Azov Regiment is functionally a part of the Ukrainian military, subject to its authority, and disconnected from any of the political elements that once defined it. In 2022, Azov Regiment was composed of 3 entities: the Azov National Guard Battalion in Mariupol, the Azov Special Operations Battalion in Kyiv, and the Azov companies acting as reserves for various units. The first 2 numbered about 1,500 each. None of them had any official links to the National Corps or other groups in the so-called Azov movement. Their name and logo are the only obvious connections to their origins. As of 2022, none of the founders of the battalion are still involved with it. New leadership appointed by the Ukrainian military has swept out the extremist leaders, and the strict ban on political activism for service members has thoroughly severed the Azov Regiment from the political ideas of its founders. Its membership has grown to include Jews, Russians, Greeks, and other ethnicities, and its leaders insist that the Azov of today shares nothing with the original group, except its name and its capabilities on the battlefield. As we all know, Russia is far from convinced of this change, or at least it claims it isn't. Since the outset of the invasion, Putin has placed denazification at the center of his stated goals for invading Ukraine. President Zelenskyy is Jewish, and the National Corps achieved barely 2% of the vote in 2019's parliamentary elections. Clearly, there is no mass Nazi movement in Ukraine, nor does it control their government. Therefore, Russian propaganda has laser-focused on the Azov Regiment as proof of a vast Nazi conspiracy to justify their invasion. Azov has seen some of the most intense fighting in the war since 2022. Once again, it defended Mariupol from Russian aggression, but after almost 3 months of heavy fighting, Ukrainian forces lost the city. Russia accused Azov of various crimes there, although these have not been corroborated by any investigations. For example, on March 9th, Russia bombed a maternity hospital in the city, claiming that Azov fighters were using it as a base. No evidence of this has been presented, and the strike killed several civilians, including patients and medical workers. On March 16th, the Mariupol theater was destroyed by an explosion, killing an unknown number of civilians, at least 12, but some estimates claim as many as 600 refugees had been sheltered there. Russia claimed that Azov bombed the theater in order to blame it on Russia, but no evidence of this exists, and independent investigators determined Russia was responsible. On the other hand, videos emerged within days of the invasion showing Azov fighters coating their bullets in pig fat before doing battle with Chechen fighters. Since Chechens are mostly Muslim, the action was an intentionally sacrilegious act intended to defile their enemies. Full details on Azov's activities in the war are difficult to verify. The fog of war and the haze of propaganda make it hard to identify everything they've done. We at least know that Azov continues to be active, but has suffered significant casualties through death and capture. How Azov will fare as the war drags on, and what might happen to it after, is impossible to say. Still, Azov poses an interesting case study for anyone interested in current or historical affairs. This tiny group of no more than a few thousand people throughout its history has been thrown into prominence by propaganda on both sides. Ukraine, Russia, and their supporters have advanced different images of Azov, selecting and omitting information to control the narrative about the war. Russia's narrative correctly identifies the origins of the group and the history behind their symbols, but falsely suggests it represents a larger Ukraine Nazi phenomenon, and ignores that the military group and its political elements have been separated for years. Support for the National Corps is also vanishingly small. In 2019, it secured just 18 of Ukraine's 43,122 local council seats, and none of its parliamentary ones. Russia has used its exaggerations and distortions of Azov's nature to justify a war that has dragged on for more than 2 years and claimed tens of thousands of lives. Meanwhile, Ukraine and its Western allies write off Russia's accusations of Nazism as Kremlin propaganda and throw their support behind Azov as an ordinary military unit, while quietly trying to shove its illicit origins under the rug. Ever since the Euromaidan protests, Western authorities have often taken a head-in-the-sand approach to Azov and right-wing extremism in Ukraine, even when confronted with evidence of the group's darker associations. Neither Russia nor Western media or intelligence officials have the best reputation for honesty or transparency. Everyone involved has their own reason to distort what Azov is or was. Until enough time has passed for emotions to cool and evidence to be sorted, we can only try to understand Azov based on what we have. It was certainly a far-right Nazi organization when it began, but it is certainly not the same group now as it was then. However, history will be written by the victor. Azov will go down in history either as loyal defenders of Ukraine or as fighters devoted to a rancid, hate-filled ideology. With no end for the war in sight, it will be a while before we find out which is the case. Until then, you might want to learn more about history by checking out other videos on the channel. If you enjoyed this video, we have plenty more on the secrets hidden by Russia and Western governments throughout history. And you can always leave a like to show your support and subscribe to keep up with future videos.